thriving. I do know that, there's high anxieties in households around schools opening, distance learning, and how that's looking. And I just want you to stay encouraged and stay informed. Continue to look for those resources, especially here at National Parents Union. We're offering resources and shows throughout the day that'll help you manage. Here we manage moment by moment, day by day, and I just want you to be inspired. You're doing it, you're doing well, and we will continue to push for our children to thrive. And so today we have a special guest, and her name is Dr. Laura. Hello, Dr. Laura. Hello, hello. Hi.
All right. How you doing? I'm good to see.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell our viewers, and thank you for coming. It's always, a pleasure and a joy to bring our viewers on time, relevant information about their children's educations. And so I'm so glad that you're here. Can you tell everyone watching who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Dr. Laura McGowan. I am the Chief Executive Officer for the Diversity and Leadership Institute. Our institute was founded to close the diversity gap between TK through 12 administrators and students. Currently in the state of California, there are only 20% of administrators who identify as African American or Latino or Latina, while there are over 60% of students who represent those same populations. And we are one of the most diverse states in the nation. And so that disparity is deeply troubling. And at the Diversity and Leadership Institute, we've made it our business to bring forward and grow and retain educators of color. So ultimately, those and have the opportunity and the on-ramp and an environment in which they can thrive and grow as administrators in California.
Right. And, looking at that data that you just mentioned, it could become so dismal. And so I am so glad that that is your business and that you are taking on that journey. Can you talk about, what led to that journey?
Sure.
How did you end in this space? Yeah.
Yeah. So it starts back with my grandmother. She would have been 103 this year. She lived a very long life. She lived until the age of 98. She was a sharecropper from Mississippi. My family's from the Mississippi Delta, and she had a desire to become an educator. But unfortunately, being a sharecropper, she knew her lot in life was to be a caregiver and to help raise crops. And so ultimately, she only made it to the 6th grade. And at the 6th grade, she knew that she wouldn't be able to realize this dream of becoming a teacher. But she was a voracious reader. She consumed everything. It was hard for me to remember a time when my grandmother wasn't reading. And that love of reading and learning was passed down generation to generation. And so ultimately, my grandmother, after learning that my grandfather, who only had a 3rd grade education, couldn't write his name or read, she ultimately taught him how to read and write his name. So in lots of ways, she still was a teacher, not in the traditional sense, but a teacher nonetheless to her children. And so that love of learning was passed down to my mother. My mother is one of 16 children. So my grandmother had 16 children. And of those 16, my mother was the only to finish college. And she did it at 40 years old with 3 children. I am the youngest of 3. There are 12 and 13 years between my brothers and I. And I remember going to college classes with my mother and her. And so it was that fire within my grandmother passed down to my mom that ultimately led me to want to become a teacher. And so growing up on the south side of Chicago, had an opportunity to teach. And I started teaching on the west side. And that's when I discovered my love of being an educator. And that was over 20 years ago. And I have enjoyed every moment of being an educator, so much so that eventually I founded a school of my own. And it was really through that journey of being an educator that I really began to understand disparities that existed, who were of meager means or even middle-class Black students and their white counterparts. I was privileged to go to a magnet school in Chicago, and that was because my mother learned how to navigate the system. And unfortunately, she didn't really know how to do that when she had my brothers at a very young age. But after she how the dynamics worked in the public education system, she was able to get me into a choice school. And so I, as a student, thought that was the reality for a lot of other students who were on my block. But when I became a teacher, I recognized in a very quick manner, very short order, that the quality of education that I was receiving in the same public education system was very different from the kids that I ultimately ended up teaching as a high school English teacher. So in that time, I was teaching kids who were reading on a 4th or 5th grade reading level, who were 10th and 11th graders, some barely writing or and to go to college. And that's what they told me. Ms. McGowan, I want to go to college. Like, how do I get to college? And I was infuriated. I was infuriated because I had 9 months to try to get them at reading level, which is essentially nearly impossible or completely impossible, quite honestly. But I did the best that I could with what I had. And it was in that moment that I decided that I wanted to do something more. And I didn't know what that would be. I didn't know if that was going to be a principal. I didn't know if that was going to be a content area lead. But I knew that I wanted to do something. And so not too many years after that, I had the opportunity to come and live in Los Angeles. And I said, you know what? Things in Los Angeles are going to be completely different. In Chicago, kids are going to be reading at grade level. It's going to be teacher. And when I got here, it was the same thing, except instead of me teaching 100% African-American students, I was now teaching students who were primarily Latino. But in the school that I was in, we also had a fairly large population of African-American students as well. But the story was the same. Mm-hmm. And again, that anger, that how could students be passed along year after year after year, not knowing how to read at grade level? And that be acceptable. And so, again, some time passed and I got an opportunity to move up the ranks and became having an opportunity to go into a fellowship program to show me how the ropes essentially of how to become a charter school founder and leader. And ultimately that's what I did. And I founded our school back in 2010 and it's still here today. And I have the opportunity to sit on board and now do this work full time and finding individuals who were much like me, have a fire burning within them and want to make sure that our kids are achieving and excelling beyond what our current realities are. And so that's how I got here. A very long story. Try to make
but that's great.
But that's how I ended up here today.
Right, and those experiences informed and really are what pushed you, and that was your trajectory on your journey, right? And a lot of us share. Shout out to my folks in the Midwest and in Chicago, especially my peoples out there fighting for quality, high quality education. I am so glad that you are stating that it's not just their problem, it's our problem here too, right? Because here we are, and people look at California and they think, wow, that is a wealthy nation state, so progressive, so liberal, yet children are not receiving a quality education. When we look at the Black student data, almost 68% of our children 3rd through 11th grade that tested can't read or write at grade level. 80% cannot do math at grade level, and they call that achievement gap, right? It's how are we educating them, and educators really want to educate them or not?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they learning, and are they being passed along, right? And so many of us share that passion, and I always am so grateful to honor just our elders and our ancestors in this battle for education, because narratives are painted that we don't care about education and we're not involved as families and parents, and that is such a lie, and I like to debunk that, right? We
Mm-hmm.
care deeply about our children's future and education and the quality of education they receive. And so talking about the mode of education, because I look at education as a mode to freedom from oppression.
Yeah.
And I believe that our predecessors and our matriarchs and our patriarchs believe the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about how Black children should be educated, can you talk about what that should look like? What should they be learning, and what are they actually learning?
Yeah. And I want, especially, the deficit mentality with which African American parents receive from, generally from, people who are entrusted to care for their children and to educate their children, and that's a very real thing, and it's something that unfortunately still persists, and it's something that, through our work at the Diversity and Leadership Institute, in looking for, educators who share this liberatory mindset, who believe that, just because parents don't participate in Eurocentric ways
Right.
of participating, doesn't mean that their participation is less. It is also upon the leaders to create opportunities for parents to engage in ways that work for them, and they should set the tone for how they engage in the school building. As a leader, I am a servant. I am a servant to the community. I am a servant to our parents and to our students and to our teachers. And so, in what ways can I provide the best opportunity for parents, students, and staff to engage in the broader school community, and even beyond that? And we could talk about this a little bit later, but how do of the school building, right? But to your question about how do we better educate black students, I think it starts with the mindset of the educator, right? And how they are approaching how students learn, and
Yes.
really extending beyond what's in the textbook, and going back to how they believe, what they believe about students, right? Because if you're entering into a school building, and you're already entering it talking about what kids can't do, what Black kids can't do, then you're missing it, right? And you
Yep.
shouldn't be there, right? So we have to start with the mind. I also believe that leadership is critical. And if leaders are leading in appropriate ways, and if they are thinking about the education of all children, particularly the education, if we say Black Lives Matter, we need Black minds matter as well. So how are we thinking about the education of the Black child and educating that child in the way that best meets their need, not in the way that we have been in a lot of ways trained to educate our Black students, but doing the work to really find out what that means to educate a Black child. Both as a leader and also as a teacher. But I'm also thinking about this in the context of what we are experiencing as a community. How Black students have been taught history, and how as they have been taught history, in a lot of ways it might be a sanitized version. So I think that we have to be honest and authentic at age appropriate levels with our children about what are we currently experiencing in our world, and what is the historical context that has set the stage for what we are experiencing right now as a community, right? Because we lie to our children, and then they go out into this world, in some cases, them and equip them with the historical context, the current context, the R's, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic that they need in order to thrive. Because to your point earlier, in order to really establish a liberatory mindset, going back to my earlier point, our educators have to be liberated because we recognize that our liberation is tied to the liberation of our students. And then their liberation is tied to the liberation of the next generation. So when I think about how we should be educating Black children, that's what I'm thinking about beyond what's in the textbook, but really form the current reality.
Right. And you know, a lot of this, and I heard you say that, what are they thinking? What is their thought process that sets those expectations when our children enter into their space for education, right? And a lot of this is a heart condition.
Yes.
You know, how you feel about my child or even me is going to directly represent how you operate with me and my child, right? When you see me, what is your first thought, right?
Yes.
That's the same thing that you're going to think when you look at my kids, when you look at my grandkids, or when you look at children that look like us.
Yes.
Okay, that's going to be your thought. And if you are not willing to challenge your heart and your mind to capture that thought and shift into another direction, we're going to continue to get this cyclical thing that we've always gotten, highly deodorized and aromatic words and good sounding things that give us a good feeling but don't produce results.
Yeah.
And so I see that is a focus of your work. How much of that, moving beyond cultural relevance, because anyone could say they're relevant culturally, right? How much of that it should be cultural congruent with ethically matched providers, educators?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, and as I think about, you know, even how we select or how people enter into the profession, and then how leaders determine who they're going to hire to come into their school building. Again, as a leader, you have to be able to, one, critically examine your own stuff.
Yes.
Right? Because, you know, white supremacist concepts are so interwoven into our society. Within those systems and not recognizing that we are being oppressive in our practices, right? Because it's sneaky. It sneaks in, it seeps in, and before you know it, you are operating in that mindset by your practices and your policies, right? So I think it starts with the critical self-examination, and Khalifa talks about this in his work around culturally responsive leadership. But starting with that critical self-examination and then making that a regular practice in your school building, right? How are your teachers critically examining themselves? How's the front office staff? So to your earlier point around, you know, building. I don't care if you have on a bathrobe, hair rollers, and flip-flops. It doesn't matter. I am somebody's parent. I love my child, and I am here because I love my child. And so if you are approaching me based on what I look like, and you're not giving me the respect and honor that another human being deserves, that's problematic. So we have to internally examine like what our mindsets are and encourage that across our school building. And then once we're doing that, then we can have a conversation about like what is culturally responsive, because you're operating in the right mind. Another strategy. Oh, this is culturally responsive. Oh, this is a rap lyric. I can tie this in and the kids will like it. But if you don't understand, if you haven't done that self-work, then you're not going to connect, and it's not authentic. So to your question about like how do we make sure, because this is a matter of heart, like we have to make sure that we are examining our hearts. We have to make sure that we are doing that work internally. I've been guilty of it, right? Before you know it, like, oh, okay, well, this is the policy and I'm just going to run with that policy and not taking a step back. And then when you take a step back and you're saying, who is being disproportionately impacted by this policy? Along with our leaders, with what is underneath And it may not even have been intentional when the policy was drafted. But as we are actualizing that, as we are implementing that, then what are the outcomes for students of color?
You know, and as a parent, and I've sat on parent panels and had this discussion with educators and administrators, and my thing was, if you guys are not willing to do the hard work, then contract it out to somebody that is.
Right.
Because our children cannot wait. And until you're ready, let them come in and do what is absolutely necessary to educate and adequately educate our children while you learn how to commit to this hard work that you have to undertake. Because this is a challenge day to day to reject, you know, what you may have historically thought of what people call biases, right? And then to inject or put in that place the truth, right? And what you see right before your eyes. And our children don't want to get to 11th grade, 12th grade, think they have a future, but they can't read and write. You know, that is totally unacceptable. And that there needs to be, like you said, setting the tone, creating that ecosystem of we're going to make sure every student thrives in this environment, no matter what their skin color is, removing and rejecting the biases, setting high expectations. What does your expectation look like? And if you're not ready to do that, then you're not ready to adequately educate kids. You should be contracting with people that are, and allow them to adequately educate our future leaders of tomorrow, you know, and just, that's my little soapbox, and that's how I see it as a parent and a grandparent. You know, this is a right now, today, should have been done yesterday type of movement to adequately educate our children. And so talking about right now and us being in this pandemic, you know, what is your feedback and your thought around what's happening with our students currently during the pandemic time?
It grieves me, to be honest. And I have a son myself, a Black boy, who, you know, I can see he's a baby. He will always be my baby. I don't care how old he is. But he has this light in his eyes and excitement around learning. And I think about the gap, the opportunity gap that already exists. And I think, and I'm grieved because I'm thinking about how COVID-19 has further exacerbated this gap that already exists. And it is going to further exacerbate it, especially as I think about the realities of our parents and the situations that been laid off, who now that we don't have this extra influx around unemployment, who are struggling to make it. I think about, you know, multi-generational households and children, you know, trying to access, you know, spaces to learn. And I think about, quite frankly, in a lot of cases, the lack of cultural competency that I'm seeing around what needs the communities have, right? I think it's great that, you know, that food was distributed. I think that's wonderful. But I think that the next ensuring that students are educated, right? So not only do they have computers, do they have hotspots? And then if they're in a situation where, you know, their parent has to go to work, how are we thinking about ensuring that parents have appropriate childcare? Safety is paramount right now. That is the top thing on everybody's minds, on every parent's mind. You know, my mind. Where am I gonna put my child when I have to get on a call? How can I, you know, make sure that but I have the flexibility of working from home. Everybody does not have that level of I also think about these pods. I think about how, you know, there are people who have the means and people who don't. And a lot of times people don't have the means. This is very expensive. I'm supposed to be provided a free and appropriate education, but I have to pay in order for my child to access this high quality of education that, quite frankly, they probably weren't receiving in a lot of cases in the first place, right?
Exactly.
So this is why I am grieved and deeply concerned. But I also feel it as I think about the work that you all do at the National Parents Union. There's a lever that you all have that a lot and the ability to send out a signal and as a beacon and have people come together and post their list of demands and demand that leadership provide them with the quality education that they deserve. And quite frankly, as taxpayers, they're already paying for, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm thinking about, how do we, as a community and as a community of educators, ensure, especially those who are on the margins, who don't necessarily have the means, don't get left behind.
And I have to validate that, and I want to say, I have a strong sense of community and tribal collective work. Okay. Mm-hmm. So check on your neighbor. Okay. Yeah. I'm so glad that if you are being successful, keeping your hands washed, being a good citizen of the pandemic, good for you. Great. Yeah. But how is your neighbor doing with their child's education? Even this message goes out to grandparents. I say this all the time. Grandma, grandpa, aunties, uncles, let's work together. Mm-hmm. Make sure that every single child has what they need. Because I will tell you, these disparities existed before the pandemic. It's just that now they're very clear and in our face. Okay. Yeah. And in order for us to elevate, we have to go beyond having discussions where we end up meeting and having another discussion. Yeah. To what are we going to do besides, talking about this to help each other thrive, because nobody's coming to save us. Okay. I'm sorry to burst your bubble today if you're waiting for some kind of superhero, you know what I mean? Those are superheroes exist in good books. Yeah. But we collectively have to shift our mentality and our focus and our work around the thought, I'm going to make sure my household and my children have what they need to be thriving, but I'm going to go check on my neighbor, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to help them too. And then I'm going to demand accountability behind measurable outcomes. What's happening with that? What is the leadership doing that what are they doing to produce measurable outcomes? Mm-hmm. And what are they doing with the funding, right? Yeah. Yeah. People think of public education as free, but it's not, because there's funding that goes into that. Mm-hmm. It's not just free. It's not just, and it's not a one size fits all. And so talking to leadership, what should they be doing, especially to our Black educators and leaders? Yeah. What should they be doing during this time to really help, as well as we parents push and fight?
Right. And I love what you shared about, really tapping into our families and into our communities, and, reaching outside of our doors and going and checking on each other. That's critical. And as I think about this in the context of educators, right? But we're going to have to do more in this particular context. We're going to have to stretch out beyond our computer and looking at our students in the four screens, especially, as we look at the data around how many African-American students are not logging in, and probably for some good reasons, around why they're not able to. But when I don't see my student in this box on the screen, and I haven't seen them, what am I doing to make sure that they're okay? Am I making phone calls? Am I putting on things are going, right? How can I do beyond what is required, and do more to make sure that this gap doesn't continue to widen? Because if we don't do more, then we're going to continue to see what we have seen over the last several months. And so, I would implore, our educators and our educational leaders to really stretch a little bit more, because this is a matter of life and death. And if we aren't, taking ownership in this moment, then there will be a price to pay. I think it's great, that, people are excited about Black Lives Matter. But if Black Lives Matter, then that means that Black educated people should be doing what they need to do to make sure that the next generation is educated, so that they can ensure that this idea of Black Lives Mattering, it continues to be a reality in our activism. And we know that activism starts in our homes and in our classrooms. And so how are we cultivating that in the next generation of students?
And I have to, really, really say this to my viewers. What she's saying is absolutely right. How are we ensuring that we're doing these things? And I want to even take that a step further. Local community organizations, civil rights organizations, okay, churches, okay. How are you moving in a progressive way beyond just ensuring that people have a lunch or a breakfast, but that they can actually read? I need to know if the kids can read and write, okay? I want to make sure, it's good to, we pushing and marching and protesting and, all of that's necessary, but are our children able to read and write at grade level? And you all play a part and role in that. I don't want to continue to hear the talk around it, right? I want to know the active participation in being a part of the solution. What is their active role? It's good to have fancy titles and all that, whatever, being a good citizen of the pandemic, whatever you want to consider. But what does your solution look like? Are you checking on the neighbors' kids and saying, can your kids read? I want to give them a book and see if they can read. I mean, even that. A dictionary. I mean, kids don't even know what a paper book dictionary looks like. My kids do, because I'm old school. And you know what? Get that Webster dictionary over there. We're not looking nothing up. We're going to put it on this paper and read this book. And I need to make sure you understand cursive, so that if you have to go back in history and check some annals and archives and records and letters that were written in cursive, that you understand what you're looking at, okay? Because that could be part of your freedom from oppression. But, really seriously, linking arms as far as community organizations, as far as churches. If you have members that enter the church and their kids can't read, that's not freedom from oppression. That's against the Isaiah 61 charge. I just have to put that out there, and I'm a believer, and I make sure that this is said. If you are a civil rights organization and the kids around the corner can't read and write, I just, have to say, admonish you to make sure they can. And so, what is?
Can I add on to that, Christina?
Please do, because I'll take it all the way.
I think that's an excellent point. And as you talk about, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and I often think about just, the weight that many educators feel and many schools feel in this moment and beyond this moment, just to be everything to all of the students. And that is not the responsibility that they should have to bear alone. How are we engaging with community-based to assist our students with counseling services? Because this is a very traumatic time. I mean, if Michelle Obama is talking about like being low-key, depressed, and so many families who are, losing loved ones to COVID-19, or just the general environment, right, that is emotionally taxing. How do we as school leaders find bridges with
Yes.
organizations that provide those services, regional centers, like what the county, like what are we doing to get so that we aren't shouldered with all of that? Because that is not our responsibility. A list of services, a list of organizations where our parents, our staff, quite frankly, can go to get what they need. You know, outside of the educational services, right? How are we providing for the whole child?
Yes, and that means looking at the whole family, right? Yeah. You know, if you know single parents out there, and I'm a single parent that homeschools, okay? Mm-hmm. And so I talk from a place of, this is my passion. If you know that there are families, single father households, single mother households, and there's multiple children, check on them. Find out how you can help, but you have to have the heart and the mindset that you want to see everybody elevate, mm-hmm. that you want to see everyone have what they need, and that you want to make sure the next generation does better than the last. And exactly. So speak about what is currently the work of Diversity and Leadership Institute.
Yes,
I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, we're really excited, and I'll talk a little bit about the town hall that we're going to have a little bit later. But essentially, our work is looking at, you know, how do we increase this pipeline of Black and Brown educational leaders? Whether you're a district leader or aspiring leader or a charter aspiring leader, do you care about kids, and do you care about the education and liberation of children of color and communities? Those are the leaders that we would invite to apply to the fellowship that we're actually launching next fall. And you know, we welcome you to visit our website to learn more about that, and also reach out to me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have who might be interested. We are also a part of a much broader coalition of organizations who have made it their business to ensure that we have more people in leadership who look like organizations have made a commitment to do 4 things. One, to research. This organization was built on around a study that looked at how the benefits and some of the broader impacts that leaders of color have on students of color. And so what we found was that in the state of California, TK through 12, when we looked at schools led by people of color, African American and Latinx specifically, we found that there was a significant decrease in suspensions. Close to 50% of a decrease. Similarly, for Latino students, we saw a decrease of about 45% of suspensions when they were at schools led by Black or Brown leaders. We also saw, and also regardless of race, there were decreases across the board when we looked at suspensions. Also, when we looked at overall student achievement, especially when it came to math and English language arts, again, significant increases in achievement when they were, on average, when they were at schools led by a Black or Brown leader. So we know that there is something to leadership. Coalition is to provide a deeper dive in looking at research around what are these school leaders doing to yield these types of outcomes, right? And we know it's not just because they're a person of color, but what is it? What ideology? What level of cultural competence? How are they engaging with families and students in ways that yield this type of outcome? The other thing that we pay very close attention to is who in the space, what other Black or Brown leaders who are doing this work, and how can we elevate them, right? How can we show these leaders are doing this work and they're doing this work? See what they're doing, adopt some of their practices, right? Yes. Into your own schools. So that's the second thing we do. We identify and we amplify folks who are doing this work well. The other thing we do is try to build a bridge from theory to practice, because in a lot of cases, many of these institutions of higher learning, they're gatekeepers. And largely in these education programs, many of the folks who are admitted are white. Right. And so that's why we have what we have in the state of California, this 20% of administrators and then 25% of teachers. So there's a gap both on the teaching side and on the administration side. So how do we build a bridge between these institutions so that they are more racially diverse in their admittance, and making sure that they are retaining these educators? And lastly, what we focus on is advocacy and action. So now that we've given you all the research, now that we told you who's doing this stuff well, and now that we have began to open the door, open the dialogue about who should be getting into these education programs, let's go on out and advocate and let folks know about the data that we've already shared with you, and really start beating this drum around racially diverse leadership who are culturally competent, right? Yep. And are about liberating the community. So that coalition is a really big part of our work, because we believe that we can't go at this alone, right? We have to go at this together. And this is a part of that advocacy, is a part of that town hall that we'll be hosting next Thursday, which I know you're going to give me time to talk about.
You actually do want you, someone's asking how can they find information on the fellowship that you mentioned. And so if you could go ahead and share how people could locate this information, that would be great. And I'm going to put it in the chat.
Yes. Go to diversityinleadership.org, DIVERSITYIN leadership.org to learn more about that. You can also sign up there to be a part of our regular newsletter. And I invite you to join, the conversation that we're having next week. But the fellowship is really designed for hiring who have, aspirations to become an administrator. If they're currently serving in an administrative type role, like a dean or AP, they're more than welcome to apply. And our goal is that it would be minimal in terms of costs. So we want this to be 95% covered. And at the end of that 14 months, they would essentially receive a credential to be an administrator, because what we don't want to do is saddle Black and brown folks with more student loan debt. That's
right. That's a whole nother day conversation.
Exactly.
And I'm blessed
religiously.
Right. And I'm blessed that I was able to accomplish my educational goals without the student loan debt, but I know that is not the reality for most of my peers. And so I'm really, really, really appreciative of that. Speaking on moving from theory to practice, right? Here we, as parents, look up the California Ed Code, and we see all these wonderful sounding words and the policies and the legislature and all this other stuff. And then you have this dichotomy of SB 98 that says, well, wait a minute, we didn't really respect y'all's rights. Because we're not going to fund your kids if they go here. And so talking just about the political landscape, what's happening here in California currently, what would you like to share about that? Because I know how I feel about it, but
Right, exactly. And I can talk about one thing that, some members of our coalition were really adamant about our supporting was around reinstating affirmative action in the state of California. And, Prop 209 essentially, it wreaked havoc in communities of color. And especially as we think about admissions to, UCs and Cal States, and how there was a sharp decline of African students being admitted into the university.
Yes.
That particular piece has been very detrimental. And so when there was an opportunity to get engaged on what was then ACA 5, which is now Prop 16, which will be on the ballot in November, I really want to encourage people to look into that, because essentially our ability to reinstate affirmative action would be a game changer. It would essentially, as we think about who is currently on the receiving end of lack of affirmative action, it is of color. Now about 50% of business owners in the state of California are businesses owned by people of color. And so as COVID-19 has shown a bright light on that, those individuals will be disproportionately and have been disproportionately impacted. I can't tell you how many businesses are being closed because of what has happened as a result of COVID-19. And also, we haven't really been able to institute policy that would be race specific because of Prop 209. So as we think about the needs of Black and brown students in our communities, not being able to really call out, like we know African American students, and we know that Latino students aren't too far behind Native American students. So our ability not to be able to call that out has had horrible impacts on what could be. And so the passage of Prop 16 would allow us to be very specific about groups who need this additional support. And so that's one piece of legislation that we were, very proud to be a part of, and looking forward to this being on the ballot in November. And so folks really need to do their research on that, because I think that will be, like I said, that would specifically impacts community on what's happening right now and what I'm really passionate about coming forth on the next ballot.
Right. And it's really unfortunate that here we are in 2020 still fighting for this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like when I was pushing through African American Parent Advisory Council committees, the district level, they would say, you guys, there's no silo or categorical funding anymore. And I'm like, educate the kids you got. Use the average daily attending Black student should be educated. That's not a silo, right? But that's what parents are told.
Yeah.
And then to see the California Constitution says people aren't supposed to be granted preferential treatment, but it shows in the outcomes that you're granting preferential treatment to certain subgroups, but yet you're telling me it's not a silo.
Yeah.
I could do a whole day just talking about how the Constitution has not protected us and our children. How in having the guarantee through a constitutional right to education in California has not provided our children the right to a high quality education, and how necessary it is to continue to push in that direction. Immediate actions as we begin to start to close the show. Talk about ways that people can get involved, and definitely share that town hall information and your final thoughts.
Yeah. So one, I just thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. It felt
Thanks for coming.
To an old friend. So thank you for creating a space that makes me feel so comfortable to talk about things that I'm very passionate about. In regards to the town hall, so what we're doing next Thursday at 5:30, we're hosting a virtual town hall. University Leadership Institute to get more information and to register for the town hall. But we are centering the voices of students and parents. So we're excited that we have a high school senior from Compton who will be delivering our keynote. And she is an incredible young lady. We're excited to have her, but she's going to talk about her experience having leaders of color and educators of color in her life and the difference-making power of that. We're also going to have two parents having a dialogue about how what their experiences have been in the public education system and advocating for their own children and what they want to see happen. And the parent and the students are going to be really asking for commitments from an educator panel. So we have the parent, the student, and they're going to be posing questions and asking for commitments we have an assistant superintendent, we have a principal of a school, and we have an educator. And all of them are educators of color. And they're going to be responding to these concerns and making commitments based on what they're hearing community and from our students. And so this is, to me, an opportunity for parents to get engaged, for students to get engaged, because so often they're left out of the conversation, right?
Yes.
It's the educators saying what's best for students and not bringing in the voice of the primary educator of students, which are parents and students who know what they might not know about the intricacies of the curriculum and how it's developed, but they know how they best learn, right? So this is an opportunity for us to hear their voices and really center those voices in this new COVID reality. And ultimately acknowledging that normal is not something we want to get back to, right? Because normal didn't work for us. It hasn't worked for us. So how do we create a new paradigm? How do we create a new normal for our community around education, right? And so we're going to be listening to the parents and the students talk to us, and then the educators are going to be listening and responding. That's a beautiful thing. I'm excited.
That is a beautiful thing. You know, there's like a lost art of civil discourse, I'm noticing. So I am so glad that you guys are doing that and you're leading that, and this is your business, right? You are about elevating our children. Thank you so much. And then utilizing the information that I did put in the chat. You could go and find out more information. I put the link there. Check out that town hall next Thursday. You know, I will be looking for that. Thank you so much in sharing that information. But if you have a final word that you'd like to share with our national viewers, I would so appreciate it at this time before we close.
Sure, absolutely. For me, I think of two words as I think about the plight of parents of color, and particularly Black parents. We are resilient, a group of folks. People constantly count us out, but we keep coming back. And so I would say to our parents, keep persevering, keep being resilient, and resist. Resist the status quo and resist the idea words for parents. Keep doing what you're doing. You are our primary educators of our children, and thank you for the very hard work you do every single day.
Yes, and you know, it's an honor to serve in that way. I thank you as well. And I have a final word to educators and administrators. You are responsible for every single child that crosses your path. Okay, every last one. So don't miseducate or not educate adequately children today and complain about social woes tomorrow. Okay, every single child deserves a high quality education, and if you feel that it is too overwhelming for you to provide that for the children that you're sworn to serve, okay, then you need to move out the way or find a way. You know, even if that's contacting a colleague, like I have a child and I just don't know how to educate and I don't understand this child, but maybe you could help me something. Do everything within your means to do what is right by those children that come into your life, because they will always remember that either you taught them or you didn't. And so that is my admonition and my charge to organizations to help pick up arms, get engaged in the battle. We're fighting for our children, not just for their today, but for their tomorrow. And so I ask you, who is your neighbor, right? All of these kids that come into my space and that I have knowledge of are my responsibility to fight for them. They might not live a mile away, they might live miles away, but I am responsible, morally and ethically responsible to do the best I can to fight for them. And I ask that civil rights organizations and other organizations would do the same. And so, you know, you've been watching. That's a hard message, but you need to process and really think about that. It's the truth, and nothing but the truth. And so moving into the week, parents, remain encouraged and inspired. Check out the website. Check out National Parents Union, always here providing you with resources and information. You can contact me, Christina, at npunion.org if you have a question, need help with anything. We're always here and accessible. Thank you so much for watching Managing Day to Day with me, Christina Lasser, National Parents Union. I hope you're all well. I hope that you all thrive. Goodbye, America's beautiful children. We love you as always. We'll see you again next time on Managing Day to Day. Bye-bye.